Dear General, thank you for accepting our request.
We'd be with you, thanks.
Dear General, what are the key for Ukraine's victory? Can Ukraine win this war, and what should be done?
Well, it depends what you mean by win. I'd first start by saying what is absolutely essential is to provide everything to Ukraine that is necessary to first stabilize the front lines, stop the incremental gains by Russia, which come at a very, very high price, but not a price that Russia doesn't sees as is unacceptable still. In fact, the unconcern, the lack of concern by Putin and his commanders over casualties that are just astronomical, given my experience in commanding two different wars, this is really quite striking. So we need to help them with that in every way that we can. Again, it has to be a comprehensive approach to this, helping them, lifting restrictions on the use of our most long-range systems, providing more air defense and additional munitions for air defense, more artillery ammunition, more other weapon systems, advanced systems, accelerate the F-16 transition. All of this is essential. And this also, by the way, is what is necessary to enable Ukraine to change the dynamic in the war, to where Russia looks at the situation and says, you know, we can't achieve additional gains at acceptable cost. And that has to be the calculation that is forced on Vladimir Putin. Ukraine is doing a lot, obviously, for itself, but it needs to do more itself. In fact, if you look at the factors that will determine the future of this war, continued U.S. support, I think solid for quite some time, continued EU support in aggregate, very solid, individual European country, solid, Western support, good, and again, not just in terms of military systems and hardware and so forth, but also humanitarian assistance, financial assistance, and economic assistance. But Ukraine has to do more on its own. It has to generate more conscripts. It had its own lengthy deliberation in the parliament, quite emotional, many, many months to agree on the conscription law. Now they need to actually implement that, build their capacity to conscript and then train and equip soldiers, turn some of them into new units, some into individual replacements. That is essential, and it probably is the single biggest factor that Ukraine controls itself. All these others are largely external, in addition to the extraordinary innovation in which Ukraine is engaged, where they're producing 1 million drones, quite capable, but quite low cost compared to what we pay for them in the West. And they are a game changer. They're throwing thousands of drones at the Russians every single day because they don't have thousands of soldiers to throw at them in the way that Russia does, and just condemning them to casualties. The Ukrainians have to be very careful about casualties, so they send machines, not men. And of course, these unmanned air and maritime systems are what enabled Ukraine, a country without a navy as we would see it, major surface combatants, to destroy 1/3 of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, force the Black Sea Fleet to withdraw from the Western Black Sea, and also withdraw its final ship from Sevastopol. Huge achievement. But again, on the ground, it's more tenuous because the Russians do continue to make incremental, small, sometimes almost tiny gains, but those gains do accumulate over time. And if you lose an important logistical hub like Pokrovsk or one of those, that could actually be important tactically, maybe even operationally. Yes, the Ukrainian Kursk offensive is quite remarkable, an extraordinary achievement that they could assemble elements of 4 brigades plus artillery, engineers, so not just infantry and armor, but these other arms, EW, signals, and then the logistic elements to sustain all of it. Really quite extraordinary operation. And they still do hold not quite the 1,000 square kilometers that they had, because the Russians are now responding, but they still are forcing the diversion of some Russian combat power. But it's in the southeast that they've got to stabilize these lines. There's also the challenge of a long, tough, and likely cold and dark winter that lies ahead for Ukraine. Every thermal power plant has been destroyed. Every hydroelectric plant has been damaged or destroyed. And now Russia's going after the transmission infrastructure as well, especially that which puts nuclear-generated power to use. So lots of challenges out there. What we need to do is enable them, as I said, to change the dynamic, to change Putin's calculation so that he's actually serious about negotiations. And then, if there is a negotiation, we need to provide an ironclad security guarantee, I think, with boots on the ground in Ukraine to ensure that whatever agreement is reached is truly enforced, and it just doesn't become a few-hour pause for Putin to resume, rearm, re-equip, and so forth, and then resume his offensive operations.
But do you think that those negotiations will mean that Ukraine will not recover some of their territories? So will the West accept some part of Ukraine remain occupied?
Well, first of all, it's not up to the West, it's up to Ukraine. I could tell you that sentiment within Ukraine, having just completed my 4th trip there in the last 16 or 17 months, is changing a bit. And I think there's starting to be some degree of acceptance, at least in some parts of the society, those most affected by the deprivation and the hardship and the rest of this, in addition, obviously, to those who are on the front lines, that there might be a willingness among the part of the population to accept something less than full liberation and the other objectives that are very valid on the part of Ukraine, but may or may not be achievable.
But if Russian army is not destroyed, it means that Putin can use this truce just to increase its capacity, replenish his forces, and start the war again.
Well, this is why there has to be an ironclad security guarantee. Whether it is NATO membership or a U.S.-led coalition, the willing guarantee with boots on the ground. Again, think about what we've done in the Baltic states, for example, where we have really built up a reasonable force from the rest of NATO. That's what's going to be required here. And without that, I don't think Ukraine has the kind of guarantee they need to negotiate seriously, whatever that resolution might be.
Do you believe that the present actual strategy you described is adequate to the challenge? Should be the US military and EU military support to Ukraine, should it be increased, dramatically increased?
Well, I think the support provided by all countries, not just the US, should be increased. Same with removing the restrictions on the use of our longest range systems on Russian soil, given that the Ukrainians are using every single night their own systems on Russian soil, and I don't see a difference between those, and I don't see this latest nuclear saber rattling as being particularly persuasive. But again, all of this should be, and indeed Ukraine itself has to step up with its own conscription and then training, equipping, and fielding soldiers and new units.
You are the author of a recent book, which is called The History of Military Conflicts from 1945 to Ukraine. What is the nature of modern conflict? What 2 key lessons should we learn from the war in Ukraine?
Well, modern conflict includes a variety of different forms of warfare, everything from terrorism and counterterrorism, insurgency, counterinsurgency, a variety of different, and we see those around the world today. What we see in Ukraine is different. This is high-intensity, conventional warfare that is employing extraordinary cutting-edge drones, unmanned systems, again, not just in the air, but at sea, and now increasingly on the ground. There are soon going to be robotic dogs on the Ukrainian side. There are already robotic machine guns, or actually remotely operated machine guns. There are remotely piloted vehicles, aircraft and ships. So what we need to learn from this is that massive industrial strength warfare is still possible. We need to increase our military industrial base. The munitions expended here are far beyond anything we thought would be needed in recent years. That's a big lesson. The other lesson is to embrace innovation and to bring it about the way that Ukraine has, which is far beyond anything that the U.S. or any other country in the world is actually doing right now. And this is remarkable. And again, we need to identify what's happening, how it's happening, and then figure out how to replicate it in our own system as we transition from a small number of very large platforms in certain of our forces, not all of them, but some of them, to a massive number of much smaller unmanned and still capable remotely piloted or even algorithmically piloted unmanned systems.
And also I would like to ask the question concerning intelligence and the role of intelligence in this war. How much the United States or the EU countries really help Ukraine with the intelligence? Can we say that Ukrainians can see anything happening within Russia and on the front line thanks to satellites, Western, different other intelligence capabilities?
Well, the role of intelligence is obviously very, very significant in this war, but I can't comment, obviously, given my final government position, what it is that the U.S. and our allies and partners are doing in this regard, whether they can see everything on the face of the earth. All the rest of this is not something on which I can comment.
Yeah, but can you send some message, I don't know, to Vladimir Putin, just be afraid, we are looking at you, or to the Russian generals?
I think he's probably quite aware of what it is that our capabilities are, and you know, we see this real time in some of the capabilities that have been demonstrated by Israel in its fight with Hezbollah, also its operations in the Gaza Strip and so forth. There's enormous capacity and capability out there now, and if you can see it in one part of the world, you can assume that the world's greatest superpower has those capabilities.
And my last question for today, what's your impression about the future of our region? Are you optimistic about the future of Ukraine, about the future, maybe, I don't know, democratic future of Belarus or changes in Russia?
Well, as I used to say when I was the commander during the surge in Iraq, I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist, I'm a realist. And reality in Ukraine is that it is very, very hard, but hard is not hopeless.
So, dear General, thank you very much for accepting our request.